And we're back. All right, so we're calling this Apollo 11 plus 50. And the name of the series is just called The Footsteps to the Moon, the Countdown to Apollo 11. And I don't know who this bloke is, but anyway, he pops up a few times. And I don't know whether he's having a cigar or what, but anyway. I found that picture, I thought it was quite cute, so that's Neil. Anyway, so the idea of this series is that we provide a monthly progress report back in the day. So we look at all the things that were happening between when we started the series, which was in September last year, all the way through to July of 69. So for purposes of tonight, we're in March of 1969. So we look at all the different things that are happening, and honestly, when you look at all the things that are happening, it's just so many things happening. There's no way I can capture everything. It was just like so many things happening in parallel. It was a really amazing feat of, well, organisation, and particularly seeing it was really no computers and spreadsheets and all those sorts of things in the sort of the form that we understand them anyway, to be able to coordinate all that, basically Roneos and carbon paper and stuff like that. It's quite incredible. So this will all culminate in July. For the 50th anniversary, so it should be a lot of fun. So we're going to have a couple of upcoming episodes. We've kind of centred the series around some of the missions that are happening, and tonight's one will be Apollo 9. But there's a couple in between, and we're going to have one coming up actually next month on the Australian contribution. So we're trying to paint the picture of what was happening and what contribution the Australia made to the Apollo program. So, and it's a lot more than the dish, and it's not quite the same as a dish. So we'll explore all of that. There was so many things going on. There were people who've flown experiments on Apollo 11 that's up there right now. There's other things that have existing facilities and facilities that have gone that were a vital contribution to it. And then in June, we're going to be looking at the concept of how they came to the decision for the orbital mechanics and the design of the mission, the Lunar Orbit Rendezvous. They went through a process of von Braun saying, well, just build a big rocket and we'll land the top bit on and we'll blast off and everyone will come back. And then it was worked out that that's probably not the way to go. Andrew Rennie is going to give us the physics lesson on all of that in June, so that'll be a fun night. So once again tonight we're going to be looking at Apollo 9. So in the past we have been doing time travel, and it's been quite traumatic for a lot of people. So we've actually improved the technology, and we are now in 2019, and all I have to do now to go back to 1969 is push this button. And the same location. Everyone remember the Spencer Street station? Yep. The good old days. My Dad used to have one of these, not a ute, but it was an FB. That's how I learned to drive one of those. But anyway, yes, the good old days. That underpass was scary. All right, so we're now in 1969. Congratulations, everybody. You've made it. So what was happening in March of 1969? Some of the stuff you find out doing this is quite fascinating. This Clay Shaw was the only person indicted for conspiracy in the assassination of JFK, but he was acquitted. I'm not going to read all this. There's quite a bit of stuff there, so I'll just point to it and let you read it and take with you what you will. So this was Clay Shaw. March the 2nd, the Concorde took its first test flight. Pretty fascinating time, 69. We're going to the moon, supersonic travel, all the things that were happening. The Jetsons, of course. A documentary in its own right. Obviously, there was a lot of great things happening, but there's obviously the Vietnam War was raging on, and you can see there the numbers for American deaths, surpassed the Korean War and were climbing, so it was pretty horrendous. James L. Ray pleaded guilty to assassinating Martin Luther King. He faced a 99-year jail sentence. I don't know whether he's still alive. He probably isn't. President Nixon extended the area of the American operations in the Vietnam War beyond North Vietnam and South Vietnam and authorised aerial bombing of Cambodia and kept it secret. Donald's probably taken a lot of lessons out of President Nixon's history. The 79th and last episode of Star Trek was broadcast, and Ronald Ridenauer alerted the US military and government officials to the My Lai massacre, which took place in Vietnam, which was once again kept hush-hush, and he basically came out and wrote letters to Congress people and things like that. So I guess the 60s version of WikiLeaks. The Beatles, it's an ongoing theme. Where's Angelo? He's not here yet. What were they doing? The Beatles. Paul McCartney got married. So all the women in the room that were about the right age were heartbroken that Paul was finally married. And I like that he bought a £12 ring just before the shop shut. That's fantastic. And then George Harrison and Paddy were raided by the drug squad. So apparently there was some UK policeman who wanted to make a name for himself, and he'd go around and raid all these pop stars' houses to get drugs. So apparently he ended up getting arrested himself a few years later. John Lennon married Yoko Ono in Gibraltar, and they had their first bed in Amsterdam, and they made a song about that, The Ballad of John Yoko, for those people who might remember. Australia, pretty quiet month in Australia actually. This is interesting, I thought. The health insurance became a major issue. Of course, back then there was no Medicare and all the stuff we're used to now, so this publication of this report basically said that there were very few Australians had medical cover, and no hospital cover, and low-income families and etc. were just pretty destitute from that perspective. So this inspired the Labor government to focus on doing something about that. So this is a picture. I think this is an ECG machine. Not an ECG. It's a. Anyone know what this is? Not a cheek slicer. It's an ultrasound. That's what it is. A very early ultrasound. I thought it was good. It was 1969. It could be anything, couldn't it? And March 29, Graham Kennedy win the gold Logie for INT in Melbourne tonight. And top 10, the Beatles were back, thank goodness. Obladi Oblada and While My Guitar Gently Weeps. And then Elvis was under there, and a few other bodgies that I don't remember. There you go. So now I've just managed to get some top secret government information that I'm going to share with you tonight. This is how to build a Saturn V. So quickly write down all the things you need. On the left hand side you need the thrust structure, then you need the RP1 fuel tank, and then you need the inter-tank, and then you need the LOX tank, and then you need the forward skirt, and then you've got your first stage of a Saturn V rocket. So congratulations, you're rocket engineers now.
Do you think they could land one now?
What?
Some of the sections?
No way. I don't think so. So once again, we're going to look at what was happening. So they did land it. It was in the ocean. We got an engine a few years ago. March of '69, the instrument unit for the Apollo 11 spacecraft arrived at Kennedy Space Center on the Super Guppy. On the 11th of March, while Apollo 9, which we'll have a look at in a moment, was still in progress, the Saturn V launcher for Apollo 10 was rolled out of the vehicle assembly building and would launch in May for the final rehearsal. And basically, if that went well, then Apollo 11 would go in July. And in fact, this rolled out to Pad 39B, which was the only manned Apollo mission anyway to go off for that pad. We looked at it last month, but they were doing tests and trials with this mobile quarantine facility. And basically what they did is they took it out for the recovery of Apollo 9, took it out on the ship, did all the things that they would be doing if they put people in it, attaching the unit to the spacecraft and all that type of thing. And then they had 3 volunteers actually jump in the thing and spend the entire duration of the quarantine period in that trailer. They took it off. They flew it to Hawaii, I think, and then they flew it across to the States and then down to Texas. Plugged it in down at the quarantine facility and all that sort of stuff. So they did everything. Remember last month they were flying that in an aircraft to make, or they put it into an altitude chamber to make sure it held up pressure, because if it was in an aircraft and there was a depressurization, they wanted to make sure that the astronauts inside would be safe. On the 20th of March, they did some tests with the backup commander in an altitude run in the lunar module, for the Apollo 11 lunar module. And then they started stacking the Saturn V for Apollo 11. So the 21st was a pretty busy time. The second stage was moved into position for mating on the first stage. And then the third stage was hoisted up. And then they mated that. Then they prepared for the instrument unit to be put on. This is all in one day. Pretty amazing. And while that was happening, they wanted to certify, they were still concerned about the landing and whether it was going to be safe and whether it was going to hold up and how the forces were going to work. So they grabbed this LM2, which is a test article, and they put this in some test stands and vibration at acoustics test facility and did drop tests to make sure that the landing gear and the structure of the vehicle would actually withstand the projected forces in a worst case scenario, I suppose, to make sure that the thing would actually hold together. So even this late, they're going to be late in July, they're doing this in March. So it was testing right up to the very end. 24th of March, Gunther Wendt was doing altitude run tests with the crew in the Apollo 11 capsule, command module. Had a very fetching electric blue coating on that, which was quite nice, actually. It was like a plastic coating just to preserve it, and keep it in good nick. And this was interesting. There were still concerns about what was happening about what was happening in various parts of the program. And once again, this is a fraction of all the things that were happening. But the Associate Administrator for Manned Spaceflight, George Mueller, not Muller, Mueller wrote to Robert Gilruth with his concern about the software. And I'm not going to read it all, but you can see what he's saying there. Basically, he's concerned that there's defects and we spend a lot of time on the hardware, but we're not focusing on the software. And are we really confident that we're doing this the right way? And is it going to be safe to fly with this software in the way we're putting it together? So that was the 6th of March. And then on the 11th of March, Gilruth replied, he can't agree with the contention. Once again, I won't read it all. They went out to all the different players in the Dick Slayton for the procedures change board, all the different software configuration board, etc., etc. And he was convinced that they were on the right track and they were going to be working. It was going to be working well. That was fascinating. This is interesting. Anyone know who this guy is? Buzz. Okay, March 11th. He was scheduled by NASA to be the first person to walk on the moon, according to a statement to reporters in Houston by Dr. John Small, who was the director of the Lunar Service Project, so he sort of should know what he's talking about.
According to Hansen, the decision was made in January in Washington. If you quote Hansen, who spoke to the original source.
Okay.
So I highly dispute that.
Okay. Well, it would be interesting to check into that. Basically, he added later, however, it could still be changed. So whether there was different silos of communication and decision making, I'm not sure.
The conversation in Washington in January was there is no way known that person would ever be first on the moon. That's just not going to happen, even if we have to make up an excuse.
Well, let's look into that next month. What shall we? Once again, on the 11th, he testified. George Mueller testified in congressional hearings. And basically looking at the Apollo project and development from the Apollo 1 fires. People may or may not recall, January of 1967 there was a fire, and they estimated it was $410 million for modifications and delayed the first manned flight by about 18 months. And a lot of people think that fire actually saved crews later on because they did a lot of fixes, found a lot of glitches and problems and designed a lot of extra redundancy and safety into it. And this was interesting, I thought. March the 12th, they discussed the status of the fire protection system for Apollo, and they basically said the fire detection system, it became quite clear that their state of knowledge about the physics and chemistry of fire in zero gravity is just insufficient to permit the design development of flight-worthy fire protection system. So they really didn't have a good handle on, exactly if you had a fire detection system, whether it would work, whether it would get false, whether it would do anything. So they basically worked with this principle of minimising the risk, taking as much of the flammable materials and ignition sources out of the spacecraft, which is what they ended up doing.
From memory, one of the first experiments they did on Skylab was a study of flames. They were very keen to find out how flame behaved in zero gravity.
Yeah, and they've been running fire experiments for years, and on the ISS and as well. All right, March 13. The Manned Spacecraft Centre requested that Apollo Directive 41 for delivery dates for the lunar module be changed as follows. So the Apollo 12 lunar module, they've already got the Apollo 11 one at KSC. Apollo 12 would be delivered between March 1 and 26th. Apollo 13, April 12 and 15. Apollo 14, May 31st to July 15. Keep in mind that they had, we looked at last month, the number of missions they'd planned for 69 on the assumption, or the worst case scenario, that 11 wasn't ready, 12 wasn't ready or didn't land, 13 had a problem. So they gave themselves several chances to get human beings on the moon in 69 by having all of these missions and vehicles and crews ready to go in case there's a problem on the preceding mission. So quite an amazing set of, like the VAB at that, in March of 69 was just pumping spacecraft in and out. Things were landing, things were being tested, things were rolling out to the pad, even while the Apollo 9 mission was in flight. Redesigned ascent fuel tank, torus wing. So basically there was stuff they were still redesigning based on tests and evaluations of the different vehicles and the different things. March 20, wrote to NASA HQ, referring to a briefing that George Lowe at Downey, that they reviewed the possibility of deleting, this is interesting, the command service module boost protective cover. As you probably may or may not know, there was a boost protective cover that fitted over the top of the command service module. And they thought, well, actually, they probably don't need it with the analysis they've done on the trajectory and the heat and the forces and that sort of stuff. But they basically said, well, look, they'd have to develop a new coating, they'd have to test it, and all the mucking around they'd have to do to try and take it off would actually be less of a hassle and probably more of a time constraint than just leaving it on. So they end up leaving it on. I thought that was just a odd little bit of information people might be interested in seeing. March 24, they announced that Apollo 10, scheduled for May 18, would be a lunar orbit mission during which 2 astronauts would descend to within 15,240 metres, and the prime crew would be as follows with the backup crew. Interestingly, Gordon Cooper, who flew in Mercury, but he never actually flew again after that, and Ed Mitchell. March 28, we haven't looked at Apollo 9, but it's happening now, that they were saying, so they were working on that problem. Basically, they came back and saying, well, they felt that was a normal situation, they expected it, and they're not going to do
Christmas, 1968, when man first cut the silver cord of Earth's gravity to orbit the moon. Saturn V had provided the power to take him there. The command and service modules had sustained him. But man cannot begin his mastery of the moon until he can land on its inhospitable surface and take off again. To do this, he needs the third basic piece of hardware, the lunar module. The lunar module is a new concept designed exclusively for use in the vacuum of space. A two-man taxi used as a shuttle between the lunar surface and the orbiting command module. But before men can use the lunar module as an operational lunar spacecraft, it must be tested in space, first in Earth orbit. This was the primary purpose of Apollo 9, the third manned Apollo mission. Jim McDivitt, Dave Scott, Rusty Schweikert. 3 men to qualify this new machine, to make ready for the moon. This was the most complex system ever sent into space. First, the Saturn V, 7.5 million pounds of thrust from its first stage alone, over 3 million working parts. Then the lunar module, well over 1 million parts. And the command and service modules, over 2 million parts.
35 seconds in counting.
March 3rd, 1969, the count for the launch of Apollo 9 was underway. Each piece checked out before launch.
Computer monitors, 20 seconds. Guidance release, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9. We have ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engines running. Commit. Liftoff. We have liftoff at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Apollo 9, you are go all the way. Everything looks good. Roger. And Apollo 9, it's 5 minutes. Everybody's happy as a clam here. Looking good. So are we. Very good.
Once in orbit, the crew turned the command module around preparatory to the docking with the lunar module, which was still attached to the S-4B, the third stage of their launch vehicle.
And this is Houston.
Roger, it's out there, and we're turned around and proceeding with the station keeping and docking.
Oh, tremendous, Apollo 9. Thank you. Go, Apollo 9.
We're about 25 feet now on the closing point.
Copy.
All right, Houston, we're hard dock.
Apollo 9, understand hard dock. Good show.
The next maneuver, to activate the springs which would eject the lunar module command module configuration from the S-4B.
Apollo 9, you are go for ejection.
Roger, go for ejection. Houston, Apollo 9. We've had a successful ejection, and we're presently separating very slowly from the S-4B. We've got them in sight out all the windows.
Oh, sounds beautiful.
Next, the S-4B engine would be ignited to send it away from Apollo 9, away from possible interference with their complex mission.
Apollo 9, Houston.
Looks like we're going to be right down his tailpipe.
No ignition on the S-4B.
It's on the way. It's just like a bright star disappearing in the distance.
For the rest of the first and second days, Apollo 9 would fly in this configuration. 4 burns of the service propulsion system would optimize the orbit for the coming maneuvers. These burns could be roughly correlated to the mid-course corrections of a lunar mission. Then, on the third day, the crew cleared the tunnel connecting the command and lunar modules of the probe and drogue docking mechanism. This would open the tunnel for the transfer of McDivitt and Schweikert from the command module to the lunar module.
Houston, just for info, tunnel clearing went pretty much according to plan.
Apollo 9, Houston's reading you loud and clear.
Roger, I know a little piece of info for you. The drone looks as good as new.
Roger, Apollo 9.
With 2 spacecraft now in operation, new code names were introduced. The cone-shaped command module known as Gumdrop, the insect-like lunar module called Spider. Throughout the day, McDivitt and Schweikert would test every system of the lunar module. The major event of the day would be a burn of the lunar module descent engine. This engine, which will eventually be used for the actual lunar landing, would be under the manual control of Spacecraft Commander McDivitt for a large portion of the burn.
Okay, there's ignition.
Now, McDivitt put on a virtuoso performance, playing the throttle of the lunar module, each variation of thrust a note in a technological symphony.
Starting the throttle. 40%. Go down to 10%. Going back up to 40%. Going back down to 25%. Back up again. Okay, coming up to 40%. Throttle profile is complete. Just let it sit there.
The engine so necessary for the lunar landing had performed flawlessly. Another burn of the service module engine would complete the day. But first, McDivitt had a message.
Okay, I've got to get something to eat. All I've had so far today is a little bag of fruit salad. I'm about to starve to death.
Roger.
It had been a busy time for the crew of Apollo 9, but it was only the beginning. The next day, McDivitt and Schweikert returned to the lunar module. This time, Schweikert opened the front hatch and stepped onto the front porch, the first all-up test in space of the Portable Life Support System, or PLSS, and the suit to be worn on the moon.
Okay, Spider, gumdrop. The hatch is open. No sweat. Just swing, like an auto swing. Hey, I can see Rusty's foot. Can you see me wiggling my toes?
Schweikert was attached to the lunar module only by a safety tether. With his own life support and communication systems, he was virtually an independent one-man spacecraft. His call sign as the third link in communications, Red Rover.
Oh, boy, what a view. That's spectacular. It really is.
Alone in the command module, hatch opened, Dave Scott also had work to do.
Okay, Dave, come on out. Okay. Come on, let the camera run here. Taking pictures of everybody taking pictures. Yeah, you want to retrieve a sample? Right, that's a good idea.
Now, both Scott and Schweikert were retrieving experimental thermal samples attached to the exteriors of the lunar and command modules. Because of Schweikert's upset stomach the previous day, his extravehicular transfer from the lunar module to the command module, to be used if the transfer tunnel were blocked, was curtailed. But the remaining EVA, which lasted for 37 minutes, demonstrated not only that an extravehicular transfer was possible, but gave a good workout to the spacesuit and life support system that will later be worn when exploring the surface of the moon. It had been another long, hard day, the first and only EVA scheduled for Apollo until the exploration of the lunar surface. But the next day was the biggest test of them all. With McDivitt and Schweikert in the lunar module, Scott alone in the command module, the two vehicles undocked. Looking more an abstraction than a machine, the lunar module danced an inverted pirouette before its lone partner in space. Firing its descent engine, the lunar module would pull away from the command module to a distance of about 100 miles. Now, with the support of Mission Control, McDivitt and Schweikert would locate Scott alone in the command module and perform the critical rendezvous maneuvers. Each burn representing a firing that would one day take men from the surface of the moon to the spacecraft, which would take them home again.
20 seconds.
We have ignition. Burn looks good.
It's a good burn, Dave. Oh, very good. Thank you.
The lunar module had left its bulky four-legged descent stage in orbit. Now only the ascent stage and crew would return. Each burn a step in a computerized choreography which would lead to the rendezvous.
Oh, I see you out there coming in the sunlight. Great. You're the biggest blast falling looking star I've ever seen. Okay, we're 5 feet per second, about 610 feet. Okay. But you're upside down again. Hey, I was just thinking, one of us isn't right side up. Okay, I have us about 370 feet. Okay, looks closer than that. Doesn't it, though?
How does that sports car handle, Jim?
Pretty nice.
In order to dock, McDivitt needed to use a sighting device on the lunar module docking window. However, the brilliance of the sunlight made using the sight difficult. Alone in the command module, Scott helped talk McDivitt in.
Well, you're coming fine. Just keep coming easy like that. It's going to go forward to your right a little bit, relative to your body. Well, it's translation, but I can't tell what my attitude is, Dave. If I don't see it, so there it is, there. Now you're coming in. Keep it coming. You're almost there. You're about there. I have captured. Really good. Okay. Why don't you take a break for a while? Man, when I take a break, I'm going to bed for 3 days.
It had been a full 5 days, but the lunar module had checked out beyond expectations. In all aspects, it seemed ready for the moon. Now it was time to jettison the ascent stage of the lunar module to free the command module for the remainder of the mission. When a safe clearance had been established, the final test, the ascent engine of the lunar module was ignited to burn until its propellant ran out. The crew of Apollo 9 watched as their lunar module, now crewless, arced away from them.
Hey, it's really moving out. I hope I didn't forget anything on board it. He's sure a long ways away.
For the last 5 days, the flight of Apollo 9 settled into a routine of picture-taking and observations, with an occasional burn to refine the orbit. But this routine was a look into the future, a future when manned orbiting space stations, operating in concert with unmanned scientific satellites, could examine the Earth from this vantage point. When cameras such as those on Apollo 9 will take multiple spectrum photographs from visible light through the infrared, locating hitherto untapped geological and biological resources. And perhaps even more important, when man can look at his world with a new perspective, quantitatively and qualitatively observe the results of his actions on the face of his world. For with the power man controls, he can change the nature of his planet. He can no longer think of unrelated occurrences. He must realize that he exists within the structure of Earth's planetary ecological system. He can observe with this new technology the results of his interaction with his environment. Water pollution on the coast of the United States. Air pollution of a major city. The results of damming a river, of irrigating a desert. But Apollo 9 was not an orbiting laboratory. It was the third manned mission of Apollo, and it was time to come down. The prime recovery area had been shifted several hundred miles because of weather conditions in the original recovery zone. With the appropriate changes made to its flight path, Apollo 9 made its final descent into the atmosphere. The crew took these pictures of the re-entry and opening of the parachutes. The 10-day mission of Apollo 9 had met all its major goals. The ability to work and make a contingency transfer in the spacesuit and the PLSS had been proven. The capability of the lunar module to fulfill its vital role in the exploration of the moon had been established. The flight of Apollo 9 showed that we are indeed ready. Ready for the next step in meeting what may be the most significant challenge of our time, the conquest of the moon.
We don't need that ad. That was good, wasn't it? Now, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that the ascent stage of that lunar module actually remained in Earth orbit until the mid-80s. Sure, Tin, if he was here, would be able to tell us that. Yeah, I think it was 85 or something. It stayed in lunar orbit. So there you go. All right, so this is the kind of people that were producing music in '69, and we have to now transition back to 2019. I wonder how they're doing. Well, two of them are still with us, fortunately. And I saw one of the guys on the left a couple of years ago. He was fantastic. Unfortunately, John Lennon and George Harrison are no longer with us, but sadly missed. So we're back in 2019. So that's the end of this particular segment. We'll be at the April 22 meeting with our next episode. And this is where we're going to be looking at tracking Apollo to the moon, the view from down under. So we're going to have some interesting material, information, interviews and stories from people who are actually involved in the Apollo program here in Australia. So it should be fascinating. So I hope you enjoyed that.